All right, thanks everyone for being here. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm the president and founder of Sonic Virtual Assistant. And tonight we're going to be talking about how to communicate effectively with clients. Again, my perspective is that I actually started my second business. My first business, actually, I started by myself and it failed because I was too busy to do everything myself. So the first important lesson that I learned in doing business was you need to be able to delegate things. So the first thing I did for my second business was I hired a couple of virtual assistants here in the Philippines to help me grow my business. And I've been successful ever since. So I have that perspective. I've also done training with tens of thousands of Filipinos. Believe it or not, I've trained over 10,000 Filipinos in all kinds of things in the BPO industry, as well as in working virtually. I've worked with hundreds of clients in the US. So I've developed a pipeline of clients in the US that need help from Filipino virtual assistants. And what I want to talk about tonight really is how to ensure that your communication is solid, because this is a big area where a lot of people struggle for a number of reasons. We can acknowledge the simple ones. For some Filipinos, English is a challenge. Some Filipinos get English really well, and it's not a problem, but a lot, kind of struggle. And especially when you're shy or new or aren't really comfortable speaking English to a foreigner, it could be very overwhelming. So it's important that we follow certain things to make sure that we are successful. And when I talk about what you can do to be even more successful with clients, will be based on real experiences. Where I've been able to help a VA manage through a difficult client situation, or help clients figure out how to communicate better with their VAs. And this is something that I strongly look for when I'm working with VAs here in the Philippines. And I currently employ, you might be surprised, but I currently employ about 80 Filipinos in home-based jobs, either working for my virtual BPO or working as virtual assistants for small business owners. And so obviously communication is key with a company this size, making sure that we have good internal communication, making sure that we have good communication with our clients and with each other. So all those things can be kind of grouped into communication. But tonight I want to focus on a very specific type of communication. I want to focus on communicating with the client in a one-on-one situation where you as a VA are trying to figure out how to be more successful with the clients that you're working with. And the first one, tip number one, really, is you want to make sure that you're using their preferred method of communication. Now, it's a challenge because every client is different. And a lot of clients don't know about a lot of the apps that are available. So you'll find that some clients, especially older clients, clients that are less tech savvy, will prefer to use Facebook Messenger because they know it and they're comfortable with it. But Facebook Messenger is limited. It doesn't really have the ability to search very well. It's hard to go back and look at old stuff. So I think the best tool is if you can work with a client to use something like Slack, where you're able to recover information, store things. There's also a lot of project management tools that are effective for communicating with clients, like Asana or Monday or Trello. So basically, what you'll see is that a lot of clients have access to some of these tools. But it's very rare to find clients that have access to multiple tools or even all the tools that you know. So as a Filipino virtual assistant, you kind of want to be up on everything. So if the client prefers WhatsApp, use WhatsApp. If the client prefers to use Monday or Asana, use those tools. Get to know the ins and outs of those tools so that you can have the best communication with your client. And if your client doesn't know, if they don't have an answer to what their preferred tool is, then start with something simple. Facebook Messenger is something that everybody has, and it's a good way to start casual conversations. But as you start, talking about requirements and start doing reporting on what you're done and having back and forth where things tie to having to deliver things, where things that talk about the return on investment the client's going to get, you want to hopefully record a lot of those in a tool that's easier to search and look back. So that's why, you want to kind of drive your clients to use something like Slack or Asana or Monday or Trello, if possible. Again, older clients probably are going to be a little bit hesitant to that, but maybe you can explain to them the value, you can give them some examples. But bottom line, when it comes to communication, be flexible and make sure that you share with them what options you like, and then ask them what they like and find one that works for both of you. Tip number 2 is set a regular check-in time. This is a challenge too, because a lot of people are super busy, but it's really important to make sure that you and your client agree on a time where they're generally free and you're generally available to meet with them as needed. People don't like to have structured, regular meetings. It kind of like gives them, a sense of stress to always be ready for that meeting. But that stress is not as bad as what would happen if a client and you go different directions and you're not talking. So you don't have to have a weekly meeting, but I recommend you set up a time for a weekly meeting so that when you need to have a meeting with a client, it's kind of already in the back of their mind, and ask them for their best time. Some of you may use a scheduling app, which is even better. If you have a scheduling app where you're able to have clients book time with you, that works as well. But for the most part, if you're working for a client long term, if you're working consistent hours, if it's a regular thing, you want to make sure you set up a regular check-in time with them. Just for a 5-10 minute chat, to ask questions, to get feedback, to get a feel for what's going on in their business. It's really important that you stay on top of how they're doing in their business. This is an area a lot of VAs probably don't fully understand. So let me explain it a little bit more. When you're working with a client, that client is hiring you to help them grow their business. And in most cases, what that means is that client is using their savings, maxing their credit card out, working on the sideline while they're trying to do a full-time job or they're trying to raise their kids. They're probably not as focused as a lot of people would expect. So it can be kind of chaotic if you're a small business owner, especially a new small business owner or entrepreneur. And a lot of you as VAs will get matched up with small business owners that are kind of having that chaos. So as a VA, you want to kind of stay aware of what they're doing and how they're doing and be there to support them. Make sure you can help anticipate problems, make suggestions when appropriate, to support them. Because in the bottom line is really, if the client's successful, you'll be successful. And if the client's making money, they'll keep paying you money. But if the client's not successful and the client's not making money, it's going to be a very short-term engagement. So a very important tip for communicating is that you want to not just report what you're doing, but ask them how they're doing. Get to know them. The best relationships between VAs and clients are where the client and the VA become basically friends. That's ideal. That doesn't always happen, and sometimes it shouldn't. But for the most part, you want to at least have that open communication so that you know a little bit more about them than just the fact that you're posting on their social media. You get an idea of what the challenges they're facing in their business are, and you can start helping make suggestions. If you can do that, you're going to be more successful. So the second tip, of course, is set a regular check-in time to do that, to make sure that even if it's not every week, you have a time set aside that you can check in when need be. If you don't do that, if you just kind of leave it out there, the client will think you're busy. You'll think the client's busy. The client will want to tell you something and forget. You'll want to ask something and forget. And the next thing you know, the client's like over here and you're over here. The client's not happy. They're not seeing the return on investment that they expected. And they're going to say, I'm going to try something else. So you need to make sure that you communicate to avoid that. Number 3, be transparent. So provide reports. Make sure that you're doing something to show ROI, return on investment. You have to let them know what you're doing. Now, you don't want to like overdo it and give them like minute by minute breakdown of everything you do. But at the very least, once a week, ideally on Friday, you send them a message saying, this is what I worked on this week. And then most importantly, this is what I worked on and what the results of what you worked on are. Again, this is an area a lot of virtual assistants struggle with because you're doing your work, you finish it, you move on to the next client. But you're not taking time to make sure the client knows what you did and what value you're adding to their business. Again, if the client's not making a profit, the client's not seeing a return on investment in you, it's not going to last very long. So you need to figure out what it is that the client needs to do to make money. You need to figure out how do you help them do that and show them that you're working towards that. A simple report saying, on this week, I found 10 leads, and of those 10 leads that we booked 6 calls, and of those 6 calls, 1 client signed up. If you have the ability to report like that, then you do that. If you're doing their social media and they're asking you to tell what you did on social media, well, I posted on IG every day, twice a day, and I followed up with these 10 people, and these 10 people I sent, messages to, invited them to join a Facebook group. And in the Facebook group, I invited people to come to a webinar, and we got 37 cents in the webinar. You need to be able to report something like that to them, right? So then they see every week that you're doing something of value. Now, this is not to say that what you're doing is not important, but people get busy. And when money gets tight, and money always gets tight for every business owner, no matter how successful they are, they're going to want to make a decision. Do I keep paying the VA or do I not? So you want to make sure you make that question easy for them to answer in the affirmative for you. They're going to keep paying you and cut something else because what you do adds value. So being transparent, providing reports, making sure that you're doing things where they see clear value, they'll keep going. And they'll not just pay you, but they'll refer more clients to you. They'll give you a full work schedule. They'll help you actually launch your own business because you'll get so much work from the clients they're referring that you got to hire somebody else. Next thing you know, you're your own VA agency owner. This is the ideal situation, right? Where clients refer you to work and you don't have to go out and find new clients. Because let me ask, how many of you, by show of hands or drop a one in the chat box, how many of you hate having to find new clients? It's stressful, right? It's like you got to go through the interview process. You got to submit your resume. You send out 10 resumes and you hope that, out of that 10 resumes, you get 1 or 2 interviews, and you go to the interview and you know that you're one of several people they're interviewing. So the chance to really get a new client is hard. The odds are stacked against you, right? So it's much, much easier to do so well and be so important to a client that they'll refer more people to you than it is to find a new client. And don't be afraid to ask. If the client gives you feedback saying something like, "Oh my gosh, honey, I love what you did," or "Freya, your posts were amazing," make sure then you say, "Oh, great, I'm happy to work with you. Oh, and by the way, if ever you have anybody else that you want me to work for, or you want to introduce me to somebody, I'd love it." And you say something along those lines, right? Make it known to them that you'd love to take on more work, if that's the case. And if it is, like I said, that's a slam dunk. You don't have to go through an interview process with 10 other people. You don't have to make sure that your resume is the perfect resume for that job description because someone just basically sold you to somebody else as an option. Much, much easier. So make sure that you're transparent. Show your value so clearly that they'll help you find new clients. Okay? That was tip number 3. Tip number 4. This one's going to be hard a little bit. I'm just going to be honest, right? Be honest. I'm going to be honest that you need to be honest. And I'll say this because it happens all the time. And I've lived and worked here in the Philippines for going on 12 years. And I say this with all sincerity. I love the Philippines. I love it here. But one of the cultural challenges that I see that happens a lot here in the Philippines is what I call my grandmother trap, right? Everyone's got a day where they wake up and they don't want to work. Everyone has a day where they just don't feel good. And they don't want to do anything for the client. They want to go to the mall. They want to stay home and watch Netflix. They just want to lie in bed all day, whatever it may be. Well, you have a choice to make when that happens. You can either tell the client the truth that you need a day off for personal reasons, that you'll ask them if it's okay if I take today off and I'll work double time tomorrow, or do something proactive and tell them before you miss your shift. Versus what happens a lot. And I see it happening even with my full-time employees. It still happens. It drives me crazy, but it's a reality. My grandmother or my uncle or my cousin or my sister or my child is sick. I had to rush them to the hospital. It was an emergency. And I know, we all know that 90% of those times where someone says, it's an emergency, I got to rush someone to the hospital, it's probably not true. Reality check, right? I'm not saying you guys do it, but it happens in this industry. And it's easy to fall into a trap where you start doing that on a regular basis. And when you're no longer honest with the client about trying to balance your lifestyle, if you're no longer honest with the client about being able to deliver what they're paying you to do, they're going to make a choice to stop paying you and move on to somebody else who's more consistent, more honest about what they can and can't do. Now, if you're able to ask for time off ahead of time, that's great. They can plan around that. If you're going to give them a heads up, you're going to go on a 3-day vacation, or actually, I think it's like a 4 or 5-day weekend coming up, right? Then be honest, right? Tell them you want to take it off. See if you can work something out. Don't just not show up for work and then tell them your grandma got sick. That's what too many people do. And I see so many VAs flame out because they didn't manage their time better. And then they're back to square one where they got to go out and find more clients, which we all know is super stressful and hard to do. So just be honest. And then also be honest with the client if you don't like the job. If it's not working for you, maybe you can ask something else. Maybe they hired you to do 3 things, but now they give you 17 things. Maybe they hired you to do their social media, but they have you doing lead generation. It's not what you're into. You got to tell them. Again, it's better to try to save that relationship before it ends than trying to save it after it ends, right? So communicating, I know it's hard. I know it's scary. I know that it's really hard to ask someone like me, say, hey, Dan, I need to take off 3 days this week. You're terrified of doing that. Even my own staff, people have worked for me for years, still are kind of afraid of me. I get it. It's a cultural thing, right? But you need to work through that. If you're going to be successful as a virtual assistant, honesty is exactly the policy. It's the best policy for a reason. Okay, so that's number 4. Number 5, last tip, and then I'll talk about some commonly asked questions. Be on time. Simple. It's the simplest one. Plan your schedule. Make sure that you're able to allocate the time that the client needs for you to do things. Because again, you are working for somebody who is putting their time, their savings, their credit, their family in a situation where they are trying to grow something and they're dependent on you to help them do it. And if you're on time, then everything will work better. So communicating when you can't be on time, maybe not missing the whole day because someone's sick, which honestly, it does happen occasionally. People do get sick and we recognize that. But most of the time, we just need to manage our schedules better. Some of you have the ability to have flex time. Use that as a blessing, right? Some clients don't trust VAs because the VA they had before burned them, or they've never used a VA before, or all they've heard is horror stories about VAs from people. So they want you to log into something. They want you to do a screenshot, or they want to actually see what's on your screen. If you're okay with any of that, then go with it. It helps give more structure, but respect their time in the end, right? So I have my team log in. Most of my team has flex hours. They can work when they want as long as they log into our system and log in, log out. And they provide some kind of recap of what they've done in the last week or two. And that works really well. But occasionally we have VAs that just struggle with that. They're not around when the client needs them. They take, more time to do things than they should. And those VAs don't work out. So those VAs now are unfortunately looking for other clients because they couldn't keep the client that we found for them. Use their preferred method of communication. Set up a regular check-in time. Provide a report. Be transparent. Be honest, and be on time. Those things are pretty simple. None of them are like rocket science, but most VAs struggle. And therefore, after they're not doing these things that I just talked about, they start feeling stress. And they have toxic days because their client and them are not communicating. And the client doesn't trust them and they don't trust the client. And the client is expecting this and you deliver that. And all these things start to go sideways on you. And next thing you know, the client decides to quit. So if you're able to do these things, it will ensure that your chances of working long-term with that client are much greater than they would be if you don't set in a check-in time, or if you're not being totally honest and managing your time better.